Welcome. Take a moment to settle yourself. Perhaps you are lying in bed. The lights are low, and the quiet of the evening surrounds you. Let the day slowly slip away as we turn our attention to the distant past. Tonight, we will journey through the heart of Europe, through lands sometimes called the Middle Kingdoms. These were not kingdoms in the sense of a single throne or empire, but rather a broad mosaic of territories, principalities, duchies, bishoprics, and small cities that together shaped the very center of the European continent. Over centuries, this region has been a crossroads, a meeting place of Latin West and Slavic East, of German-speaking peoples and others who spoke tongues now long faded. The Middle Kingdoms were never simple. They were layered, complex, shifting like a river's current. First, we will immerse ourselves in the daily lives of ordinary people, farmers, craftsmen, villagers, those who made up the quiet rhythm of life in the Middle Ages. Next, we will turn to biography, focusing on one notable figure whose decisions and ambitions echoed through these lands. In our third part, we will wander into mystery archaeology and cultural traces that still speak to us from beneath the soil. Finally, we will look to the contrasts of society, the nobility, the clergy, and the world of privilege and ceremony that stood apart from the toil of the village. As you listen, you may find your mind wandering. That is, as it should be. This history is here to calm you, not to demand your full attention. So, let us begin. Let us step quietly into the world of the Middle Kingdoms. Imagine yourself in a small village somewhere in the heart of Central Europe during the 12th century. The morning mist clings to the fields, thick with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. The sound of roosters calling echoes faintly across thatched rooftops. Most people of the Middle Kingdoms lived in such villages clusters of timber-framed houses, their walls often woven with wattle and daub, roofs covered in straw. The homes were small, a single room or two with earthen floors that grew cool in winter. Inside, smoke drifted lazily from a central hearth, darkening the beams above, and filling the air with the mingled aromas of wood, simple stews, and the mustiness of stored grain. The villagers' lives were tied to the land. Fields stretched out in long, narrow strips, part of the open field system. Each family cultivated a few strips scattered across the village's holdings, ensuring that no household was left entirely without good soil. The rhythm of plowing, sowing, and harvesting formed the calendar more binding than any clock or written schedule. In spring, the people walked behind wooden plows drawn by oxen. The plow cut through the heavy, fertile soils of Central Europe's soils, rich but stubborn, demanding strength to turn. The work was slow, repetitive, and utterly necessary. By summer, the fields waved with barley, rye, and wheat, the grains that sustained life. At harvest time, men and women moved through the fields together, cutting sheaves with sickles, stacking them carefully. Their hands roughened by long seasons of labor. Bread was the cornerstone of their diet. Not soft bread, as you may imagine today, but loaves, dense and dark, baked from rye or barley, sometimes flavored with herbs, sometimes stretched with peas or beans when grain was scarce. To this, they added pottage-thick soups made of vegetables, lentils, and whatever scraps of meat could be spared. Meat itself was rare, most often reserved for festivals or slaughtering time in late autumn. And yet, though life was hard, it was not without small comforts. Children played in the dust of the lanes, chasing hoops or fashioning toys from sticks. Women gathered at communal wells, where gossip and news were exchanged along with water. The ringing of a church bell punctuated the day, calling the faithful to prayer, reminding them of the turning hours. The village church stood at the center, often the only stone building among wooden homes. Its walls were simple, its air cool and dim, with faint traces of frescoes painted in muted colors. For the villagers, this was not merely a place of worship, but also of community, a space where baptisms, marriages, and funerals gave shape to the span of a human life. Winter brought its own rhythm. The days shortened, the air sharpened. Work slowed, but hunger pressed more deeply. Families huddled around their hearths, mending tools, spinning thread, telling stories that blended history with legend. Outside, the snow muffled the land, but inside, life continued in quiet persistence. The people of the Middle Kingdoms lived always close to uncertainty. Harvests might fail. Disease might sweep through. Armies might pass by, taking what they needed. And yet, through it all, the daily rhythm remained. Fields tilled, bread baked, children raised, a steady pulse as constant as the seasons. Let us pause here and imagine once more the stillness of a medieval village night. The air is heavy with a scent of smoke. The only light comes from a flickering hearth. Outside, a hush lies across the fields, broken only by the distant bark of a dog or the call of an owl. This is the world in which countless lives unfolded, quietly, patiently, shaping the heart of Central Europe. From the stillness of the village, let us now lift our gaze upward, toward the world of rulers, of emperors and courts, where ambition reached far beyond a single field or church bell. One figure towers in the memory of the Middle Kingdoms, Emperor Frederick I. More often remembered by the name Barbarossa, meaning Redbeard. His reign in the 12th century gave shape to Central Europe in ways still felt centuries later. Imagine him as a young man born in 1122, in a family that bridged two powerful houses, the Hohenstaufens and the Welfs. These names may sound distant, but at the time, they were threads in a tapestry of rivalries, loyalties, and inheritance claims that determined the balance of kingdoms. Frederick's lineage meant he was well placed to unite divided factions, a rare gift in a land of shifting allegiances. In 1152, he was elected King of the Romans, a title given to the ruler who would later be crowned Holy Roman Emperor. He was not the first to bear such a title, but his energy and vision gave new strength to it. To his contemporaries, he seemed a man marked by destiny, tall, commanding, with a beard that gleamed coppery in the sun. Yet even in descriptions of his presence, there is a calmness, a steadiness that drew others to him. Frederick Barbarossa's reign was shaped by his effort to knit together the many lands of Central Europe and Italy into a coherent whole. Imagine the challenge. Dukes and counts, bishops and abbots, each with their own interests, each reluctant to yield authority to any higher power. Frederick sought to bring order where there was fragmentation, to impose law where there was confusion. He issued decrees that strengthened the rights of kingship. He reasserted the importance of imperial justice, presenting himself not only as a warrior, but as a guardian of fairness. He was a man of both sword and seal, moving between battlefield and council chamber with the same calm determination. One of his most famous ventures took him south, across the Alps, into Italy. There, the wealthy cities, Milan, Cremona, and others sought independence. They bristled at imperial control, preferring their own freedoms. Frederick led his armies to bring them into obedience. Picture the long trains of soldiers, knights in armor glinting under the sun, crossing mountains where the air grew thin and sharp. Yet, war in Italy was never simple. Though Frederick won victories, the cities resisted, and their alliances grew stronger. The conflict stretched on, year after year, until even emperors had to reckon with limits to their power. By the time of the Peace of Constance in 1183, Frederick conceded important rights to the Italian communes. It was a compromise, an emperor bending to the reality of a complex political landscape. And still, his authority at home remained formidable. He strengthened the empire's structure, confirmed the rights of nobles, while also holding them in check, and projected an image of unity at the heart of the Middle Kingdoms. Beyond politics, Frederick Barbarossa's story is woven with legend. Tales say that he did not truly die, but instead sleeps beneath a mountain, waiting to return when his people need him most. In the popular imagination, he became a symbol of continuity, a red-bearded guardian slumbering beneath the earth. In truth, he met his end far from Central Europe during the Third Crusade. In 1190, while leading his forces through Asia Minor, he drowned while crossing a river. There was no triumphant return, no final march through the heartlands of Germany. Instead, news of his sudden death spread slowly, carried by word of mouth across villages and towns. The emperor was gone, and with him a certain vision of unity. But the memory of his reign lingered. For centuries afterward, kings and emperors of the Holy Roman Empire would look back to Frederick Barbarossa as a model. His name was spoken with a kind of reverence, as if he had embodied the dream of order in a land that so often drifted toward disorder. As you rest here, consider the rhythm of his life. Born to inheritance, rising to kingship, commanding armies, shaping laws, and finally vanishing into legend. A rhythm not unlike the seasons of the villages we visited before growth, struggle, and decline, though played out on a grander scale. From the fields of Central Europe to the emperor's distant campaigns, the Middle Kingdoms were bound together, their story told not only in the lives of farmers, but also in the ambitions of rulers. So far, we have walked through the simple life of the village and followed the ambitions of an emperor. Now, let us move into another realm, the quiet, half-hidden world of archaeology and cultural memory. Imagine standing in a field somewhere in Central Europe. At first, you see only the surface furrows of plowed soil, or perhaps grass swaying gently in the breeze. But beneath your feet lies another world. Buried layers of human history, shards of pottery, fragments of tools, the faint outlines of timber posts that once formed the walls of houses. The Middle Kingdoms are thick with such traces. Archaeologists uncover them with slow, careful movements, rushing earth away from a coin, measuring the remains of a hearth. These discoveries remind us that history is not only in written chronicles, but also in what the land has preserved. One common find across Central Europe is the Slavic pottery of the early Middle Ages. Simple, wheel-thrown vessels, gray or reddish, often decorated with quiet, geometric patterns. They may seem plain to our eyes, but they were central to daily life, used to store grain, carry water, or cook meals. Holding such a vessel today, one can almost imagine the hands that shaped it, the fire that hardened it, the meals that simmered within it. Burial sites also tell us much about the people of this era. In village cemeteries, archaeologists have found rows of simple graves, oriented east to west, the dead laid to rest in linen shrouds. Some carry tokens, a knife, a buckle, or a string of beads. Others lie bare, marked only by the soil that covers them. The presence or absence of such objects speaks softly of social standing, of family, of belief. And then there are the mounds' great earthworks that rise gently above the plains. Many were built in earlier centuries, yet they remained part of the landscape well into the Middle Ages. Some held chieftains interred with horses and weapons. Others were more modest. To walk among them is to feel the persistence of memory, layered over centuries. Archaeologists also uncover evidence of trade, subtle but unmistakable. A shard of glass traced back to workshops in Venice, a silver coin minted far to the east, amber beads carried from the shores of the Baltic Sea. These fragments reveal a truth that written records sometimes obscure: that even the quietest village was connected, in its own small way, to distant networks of exchange. Culture, too, leaves its mark. In monasteries and churches, fragments of manuscripts, survival, illuminated letters, curling like vines across the page, pigments still vivid after centuries. These books were copied by hand in scriptoria, where the scratching of quills formed a kind of steady music. The monks who worked there lived quiet lives, their days marked by prayer and the copying of texts, preserving not only sacred scripture, but also fragments of classical learning. Sometimes, in these manuscripts, we find small surprises, marginal notes, doodles, even jokes. A scribe complaining of cold fingers. Another sketching a tiny face in the corner of a page. These human touches bridge the centuries, reminding us that even in a world of solemn devotion, there was room for playfulness. The architecture of the Middle Kingdoms also whispers of mystery. Romanesque churches with thick walls and rounded arches, their interiors dim and cool. Later, Gothic cathedrals rising in pointed spires, as if reaching toward the heavens. To step inside such a building is to feel scale and silence pressing close around you, the echo of footsteps fading slowly in the air. And yet, not everything has been explained. Across Central Europe, archaeologists still encounter sites whose stories remain unclear. Foundations of buildings without records, strange alignments of stones, hoards of coins buried and never reclaimed. Were they offerings, hidden wealth, or hurried concealments in times of danger? The soil does not say. It leaves us with questions, quiet mysteries that keep the past alive. Picture yourself walking through a museum in Prague or Vienna. Behind glass cases, you see these fragments: a rusted sword, a brooch with delicate enamel, a carved bone comb. To most, they are objects. But if you pause, if you let your mind wander, they become voices faint, half-heard, calling across centuries. They remind us that the Middle Kingdoms were not only ruled by emperors, not only tilled by peasants, but were also places of art, of belief, of mystery. So, as we close this segment, let us imagine again the quiet soil beneath our feet. Centuries of life, layered and compressed. Some of it uncovered, much still hidden. A silent archive, waiting patiently for those who come after us to listen. From the quiet depths of the soil and the hidden fragments of memory, let us now raise our eyes once more, this time to the castles on the hills, and to the lives of those who dwelled within them. The Middle Kingdoms were layered societies. Most people lived as peasants in villages, bound to the soil and to the cycle of the seasons. But above them, a different world existed, a world of nobles, knights, bishops, and princes. Their lives were marked not by the rhythm of harvest, but by the rituals of power, ceremony, and war. Imagine a castle rising above a river valley. Its walls of stone stand firm against the weather, towers reaching high, a banner fluttering in the wind. Within its courtyard, the sounds of horses' hooves echo against stone. Armor clinks as many tarms prepare for patrol, and the smell of roasting meat drifts from the kitchens. Life here was both harsher and more privileged than in the village below. The lords of the Middle Kingdoms were warriors. From childhood, noble sons trained with wooden swords, learning the arts of riding, hunting, and fighting. When grown, they rode into battle clad in mail, carrying lances, defending their lands, or pressing claims against rivals. To them, honor was as vital as bread. Their reputations were woven from courage, loyalty, and the display of strength. Yet, alongside this martial life, there was refinement. In the great halls of castles, long wooden tables were laid with dishes more elaborate than anything found in a peasant home. Roasted boar, venison, poultry, and wines carried from distant vineyards. Minstrels played soft music on harps or viols, their songs telling of legendary heroes or saints. Candles flickered against stone walls hung with tapestries, their threads depicting hunts, battles, or biblical scenes. The lives of noble women, though constrained by expectation, carried their own rhythms. Many were managers of estates when their husbands were away, overseeing stores, servants, and harvests. Some were patrons of religious houses, founding convents or commissioning chapels. A few, rare but remarkable, acted as regents or even military leaders. And through marriage, women were crucial links in the intricate web of alliances that tied families together. Above the nobility stood the clergy, bishops, and abbots, whose influence stretched across both spiritual and temporal realms. Cathedrals rose at their command, monasteries flourished under their protection. Their wealth came from land and tithes, but their power rested on something greater: the claim to divine authority. To kneel before a bishop was to acknowledge not just a man, but a conduit between earth and heaven. And yet, for all their splendor, the elite could never entirely escape the fragility of their world. Disease crossed the walls of castles as easily as it swept through villages. Armies brought destruction even to the halls of princes. A nobleman might dine on silver plates, yet still depend on the same harvest that sustained his tenants. The rhythms of the peasant and the prince were more entwined than they might appear. Court life, too, was a mixture of grandeur and tension. To stand in the presence of a king or emperor was to witness layers of ceremony, the bowing of courtiers, the careful language of petitions, the ritual of gift-giving. Every gesture carried meaning. Every seat at the table reflected a rank. Yet, beneath the surface lay rivalries, whispered plots, and shifting allegiances. The air was thick with calculation, as well as incense. Knighthood embodied the ideals of this world. A knight was sworn to defend the weak, uphold justice, and serve his lord faithfully. But the reality was often less noble. Raids, feuds, and private wars scarred the landscape as rival families clashed over land and pride. Still, the ideal persisted, that the warrior might be more than a fighter, that he might be a guardian of order, a defender of faith. And so, the Middle Kingdoms were divided, yet connected, villages bound to castles, peasants bound to lords, lords bound to kings, and kings themselves bound to the distant figure of an emperor. At each level, obligations flowed upward, while protection and justice were meant to flow downward. In practice, these ties were imperfect, sometimes broken, yet they held society together in a delicate balance. Picture, for a final moment, a great feast. The high table glitters with goblets of silver. Courtiers murmur, musicians play softly, dogs rest at their master's feet. In the shadows of the hall, servants move quietly, bearing trays, pouring wine. And outside the castle walls, in the village below, families huddle by their hearths, eating bread and broth, listening to the same winds howl through the night. Two worlds different, yet bound together, both part of the same Middle Kingdoms. And so, we have wandered through the world of the Middle Kingdoms. We began with the rhythm of the villages, where fields were tilled, bread was baked, and life followed the steady course of the seasons. We rose to follow an Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, whose ambitions reached across mountains and whose legend outlasted his life. We descended into the soil, listening to the faint voices of the past through shards of pottery, coins and manuscripts preserved by time. And we lifted our eyes to the castles and cathedrals where nobles, knights, and clergy wove their lives in splendor and ceremony, always in contrast to the quiet persistence of the peasants below. The Middle Kingdoms were not a single place, nor a single people. They were a mosaic of lands and lives, layered together, overlapping, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict. A crossroads at the heart of Europe, where culture, power, and memory intertwined. As you lie here now, perhaps with your eyes growing heavy, let the images drift through your thoughts. The smoke of a village hearth, the glint of an emperor's armor, the stillness of a buried coin, the flicker of candles in a stone hall. They need not be sharp or clear. Let them blur, let them soften, as the past fades gently into quiet. The people of the Middle Kingdoms lived their lives as we do day by day, moment by moment. Their struggles were great, their achievements lasting. Yet for most, it was the small, steady rhythm of existence that shaped their world. In that way, they are not so distant from us, after all. Now, return to the present, where your bed is warm, your night is still, and your mind may rest. The past is always there, waiting when you wish to wander again. But for tonight, let it fade as you sink into calm and peaceful sleep. Good night.